you got a toxic personality, right? And in today's day and age, if you want to grow a team, you want to grow a company, you want to really make great impact, you gotta pull the plug on those folks. If like the mantra that we could fix today is don't do this. And listen, there's going to be a point in time that you're going to have to. There's going to be a point in time that your board is going to want you to, or the funding partners are going to want you to. Don't do it right out of the gate. I'm a firm believer against the bro culture, right? The bro culture in sales floors is just horrible. So kind of my mission is to really call BS on a lot of the bad players that are out there and a lot of bad processes and systems.
Welcome back to the Badass Leaders Podcast. And today on the show, we have Nick Loise, a seasoned sales leader who's built and led companies across multiple industries. He's an entrepreneur, author, former VP of Sales and Business Development, and longtime marketing educator who has worked with small and mid-sized businesses to create sales systems that actually produce results. So what do we talk about? Well, first off, we talked about the hire, as especially as a young startup, you should never make as your first sales hire. We talked about the mistakes that are made in processes, strategies, and people, how to make wise decisions. We talked about how to have some of those hard conversations, some new processes that we think should be used by every team, and perhaps some that should go away. And for listeners of this podcast, he shared some free networking and collaboration opportunities. Listen until the end so you make sure you take advantage of him. Thank you, Nick, for your generosity in that area. So if you're ready, let's dig in. Welcome to the Badass Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Angela Gill Nelms, and each week I sit down with leaders, founders, and change makers who refuse to play small. People pushing limits in their careers, companies, and lives. Are you ready to dive into that kind of purpose-driven work that actually moves the needle? If so, then let's go. Okay, listeners, welcome back to the Badass Leaders Podcast. And I have Nick with me today. And Nick, what we're going to do is we're going to dig in first into learning who you are as a human. I'm very passionate about getting to know humans as humans. We don't spend enough time doing that. And so why don't you kick us off by telling us when you're not building sales processes or speaking on stages, which we're going to dig into during this episode, what do you genuinely enjoy doing and what grounds you outside of business? So we're going to talk about who you are kind of on the fun side, and then we're going to get into the expertise for this episode. So let's do it.
Well, what a great question and what a great way to kick it off. So first and foremost, I'm a husband and a father, right? And I like to say that grounds me. And in all fairness, it didn't ground me early in my career, right? It didn't ground me early in my entrepreneurial pursuits. And so I'm making an effort on, let's say, wave 3.0 of Nick and my second or third round of entrepreneurship of really being focused and present for the family. Because it's so easy to be absorbed in, getting stuff done and serving clients and growing the business and managing, investors. I was blessed to have some venture capital. And so doing all that in my first round really exhausted me, and I didn't focus on the family. So ground me, family first. Love being with my wife, right? We're foodies. We live in Chicago. We love the food scene in Chicago. She's downtown right now. She's part of a school board, so she's there. So I get to have fun with you and do all the projects that I wouldn't normally do. We love to travel. I'm a big bibliophile, as you can see behind me. These are all the boring sales and marketing books. The fun books are downstairs. The fiction and the history and all that. I love the arts, whether it's, we're blessed in major cities to have great theater, movies, and I try to just to be well-rounded and broad because I think that stimulates the brain and it makes you interesting versus just one-dimensional. So that's kind of what keeps me grounded. I'm Italian, so I can't be too far from my family. My mom and dad are a couple blocks away. My brothers and sisters, we'll have everybody over for Thanksgiving at our house. We like to host. So we always say we love it. And then the day after, we're exhausted and we say, why did we do that? And then the next time we do it again. So that's kind of who I am.
so a foodie piece really quick. I have been obsessed with every version of a cooking show, such as right now I'm still binging Top Chef. I've been through all the seasons of Top Chef. I'm in Top Chef Amateur now. And so now now I'm slowly starting to become a foodie. And I go to restaurants and I'm like, oh, wait, I think this needs a little bit more acid, or I think this should be bitter. Tell me a little bit more about foodie perspective. Now, you're Italian. So do you lean more towards Italian food when you go out? Or do you venture away from those family, ties that you have? And is there another area that you're more passionate about?
Well, so that's a great question. And, when my mom listens to this, I'm going to say, well, the only good Italian food I get is from my mom, right? So I
Good
normally
answer.
get, I don't, right. But I will default to Italian. I'll default to like bistro French. I'm just so excited to think about a new generation that's coming into cuisine and how great it's going to be because they're going to push the boundaries and they're just smarter and they're into it. And, my nephew who is 12 is into cooking. So we love all the new restaurants. We tried them all. We do try to go to the classics in Chicago at least once. But listen, the meal that you're with good company is the best meal you're ever going to have at that moment. So you should enjoy that meal.
Okay, so our takeaways from this little point, real quick, are mom's food is always best, and choose your company
Right.
wisely when you eat out. Got it. Let's dig in a little bit to the work that you do. Why don't you start us off by telling us about the work that you do now and how you got to where you're at? So let's do a little bit of a bio of who you are, and then I want to dig into the special areas that you work within.
Sure. Well, thank you for that. So, sales performance team really was an offshoot from a lot of the work that I was doing when I was president and VP of sales at GKIC, which was a private equity owned education company focused on entrepreneurs and small business owners and teaching them sales and marketing. And one of the things that we saw there when we kind of drilled down, our demographic was pre-revenue to about 30 million and plus plus. One of the things that we drilled down was that they could get marketing, right? They understood marketing. They could figure out the tactics to get lead flow. But many business owners struggled with the management of salespeople. They've all had their heart broken. Maybe they hired the wrong person, but they thought the person was going to be an all-star and they fanned out. And we hear that all the time. The daily management and KPIs, the managing of the head and the heart of salespeople is so incredible, right? So the work that you do on leadership is phenomenal for that because I don't think we spend enough time with that. And a lot of times what they did was they took their best salesperson and they promoted them to sales leader. And so that blew up because a salesperson is driven by different motivations, right? Versus a leader who's driven by much different motivations. He's into mentoring and growing people. So that blew up. And so then we get brought in and say, okay, we got to fix this because I can't fire my best producer, but he's failing as a sales leader. So that's the genesis, right? So we kind of created this as a workshop, if you will, where we would fly entrepreneurs in and they'd pay us a lot of money, right? 5 figures to help them build this. And as a good entrepreneur, and I was kind of on my, if you've been around private equity, you're on your third or fourth ownership, right? Changing, the landscape changes on a daily basis. I was just ready, right? It was a great exit. They were really good to me the entire time. I'm still working with some of the clients that we worked with that were part of the original organization. So it worked out really well. But it's just fun every day because every day is a challenge because every salesperson's a challenge and every sales environment's a challenge. And it also, as we sold in 2020 is much different than as we sold in 2025, which is much different than how we sold in 2010, right? So you kind of have to change. And we see a lot of people that are in this space that maybe are selling the same way, but today's buyers are some of them are younger, savvier, more tech, so there's a lot of things that we have to do. So to tell the story, right, I've been a salesperson my entire life. I was a marketer my entire life, right? Went to graduate school, became a really disciplined marketer, was a VP of marketing, knew everything I could ever learn. I'm saying this tongue in cheek for those that can't see my eyes, and started my own agency, right? And so in my early 30s, I started an advertising agency, and we were really early adopters to what we'll call lead generation websites and lead generation and funnels. now it's commonplace, but this was no one really did this, and so we did a lot of that. I wanted to grow the company fast and furious, right, as every entrepreneur does. Those that you've interviewed, same things.
Yep.
And so I went out and got some venture capital, took on some partners, and had a great run. But at about 6 years in, the VC they wanted their money out, right? Which is you take it, you got to play the game. I had partners that were going on to different things, and so we sold that business, exited that business, and then I went into GKIC, which now led me to sales performance team. So that's a lot
Okay.
to unpack, I know,
I was
but
about to
hopefully.
say, no, this is amazing. A lot to unpack. Okay. I'm going to, hopefully you won't kill me for going bold in with this first question, but
Please.
having worked in the entrepreneur space and worked with sales individuals and sales professionals for my entire career, I want to break this perceived stigma of the salesperson. I know so many people put salespeople into this box as if they are all almost like they're all used car salesmen and they're all fake and you can't really
Oh,
trust and they really just want your money. And especially if you're in sales and you're the brilliant jerk in the company and you're getting numbers, but you treat everyone like, this is how I'm going in bold because there's a stereotype and kind of stigma about that area. But I've worked with some amazing people, and I think that we're all about selling something. And if you're in an area where you're selling something you're passionate about and you have values and integrity, it's really an amazing career to have. So help us like dig into, I don't know, maybe why do people have that perspective? And I know you work with building teams and managing teams within this. How do you break that out of the cycle?
so great question, and I think some of the stereotypes are created because of who we interact with, right? So there's some, like, listen, I'm a firm believer against the bro culture, right? The bro culture in sales floors is just horrible. And so that stereotype is there because it should be, right? Because there are people that act that way. And then that gets amplified because we as humans, especially in the United States, always look for the worst case scenario, right? And that's kind of how we paint that picture for everybody. So it's true, right? The what I think you call the phenomenal jerk, right, or the benevolent jerk that is the really great
I said the
salesperson, but
brilliant jerk. Yeah, the brilliant jerk
brilliant
that
jerk,
brings
brilliant
in all
jerk.
the numbers, so you can't get rid
Yeah.
of them, but they're ruining the culture and everyone else in the team.
So they're toxic. And we
Yes.
are brought in many times because the business owner knows that there's a problem. One, doesn't want to deal with it, but two, maybe wants a fresh set of eyes to say, yes, you need to pull the plug. So we're really quick to say, hey, listen, this person's great. He's bringing your numbers. There's going to be a blip, but you got a toxic personality, right? And in today's day and age, if you want to grow a team, you want to grow a company, you want to really make great impact, you gotta pull the plug on those folks. Difficult. Easy to say on a podcast on a Saturday afternoon, difficult to do in real life when you're looking at numbers. But sometimes we're brought in as the honest ombudsman and say, okay, here's the problems, here's what's going to happen. You're always going to have churn in your sales department because of the fact that this person's running everybody off. So, sales does it's there's a uniqueness, right? Because you talk about people that are hitting no's and hitting walls all day long and have to fight through that, right? That have to train. You're a triathlon. You're a triathlete, right? Phenomenal marathon run. I saw your numbers. I double worked out today because I knew I was going to be on with you. I mean, I did legs and chest, right? Because I knew I'm like, well, I
Nice.
got a double workout. But the salesperson really has to push themselves through the barriers. And I remember once I was working with the president, a brilliant woman, and she's like, well, when is no no? And I said, well, we're trained to know is never no, right? And you don't want us to be folding at the first no because we'll never move any product or service for the organization. So you have to kind of realize how they're wired, right? And why they are successful. Now, it doesn't mean that they can't be humans along the way. They can't be gentlemen or gentlewomen, right? And I think I am really excited about the young sellers, the first generation that's coming out now that we're working with, that we see coming out of universities, or maybe they're in one role and they're working themselves into sales, and how they approach selling and how they approach the marketplace and how they approach their coworkers. I'm very, very impressed with that. So I'm excited to see what's going to happen 10 years from now when they move, if they move into leadership. I don't know if they will, right? Everything I read is that, millennials don't want to go into management. And after being in management, I understand.
It is an interesting dynamic. Yes. Yeah, I see that. Well, one of the things I'm thinking about when you're talking about this, about I love, first off, you highlighting the focus on we should really understand how their brain works. And really, how as a salesperson, you've been trained, because we're all trained on this, Pavlov's law kind of thing, like reward, benefit. Oh, wait, if I keep doing this and I finally get to a yes, and that yes is a big enough yes, then the next time I'm going to be willing to go a little further and each of that, right? And we think about in triathlons and things like that, go an extra mile so I love, though, the moment to take a step back when you're working with someone and understand, okay, the way that this individual is interacting with me has a lot to do with how their brain works. And also the reason, their brain works that way, and that's great because we want them to, like I always say at the companies when I was running them, look, I want my sales team to be like the wealthiest of all of us. I want them to make more money than the rest of us, because when they're getting those commissions, we are being a big level of success. Now, I think that and I also love the comment about the difference with the younger generation coming up. Leadership and management, as you just mentioned, is looking very different coming through. And a lot of that I love. And there are some other areas I kind of want to nudge. Like, okay, somebody needs to step up and take ownership. Someone needs to fall into those categories. And one thing I was thinking about for you is you're working right now with teams all the way, you said, pre-revenue up to 20 or 30 million in revenue, right? Can you tell me a little bit for those teams? Let's just say I'm a pre-revenue early founder CEO. What am I looking for in my very first sales partner versus what are some of the struggles you see once you get up to that 25, 30 million where you actually need to try and beat the next year in those pieces? What are the differences that you're looking for in those two stages?
So, what happens in pre-revenue? Usually, the founder is the best salesperson at that moment, right? And here's the problem that we run into that we have to reverse engineer and fix is you as the founder intuitively could sell your product. I could wake you up at 3 o'clock in the morning and you could probably close me on your product and service. One, from a passion perspective. Two is because you've been doing the reps, right? As the athlete, we do the reps. And so, when Angela asked me that question about 5 minutes in, I got to say this at 25 minutes in because at 45 minutes, I'm going to get an objection, right? You just intuitively know the jiu-jitsu of the dance of the presentation and the close, right? You could just do it. The problem is that you intuitively know how to do it, and therefore you can't articulate it, right? You cannot tell young salespeople or new salespeople why you do what you do, right? I use the analogy, somebody went up to Jack Nicklaus and said, well, how do you hit a 1-iron? He said, well, you take the 1-iron and you swing, right? He couldn't teach you how to do it, but he intuitively knew how to do it. And that's the problem that a lot of times the founder, right? So we call that founder-led sales. They now need to move into away from that role because they have to maybe do more strategic work. They have to go do some fundraising. Maybe they have to do some other stuff. So they need to hire the salespeople. What they then do is they go out and hire probably a VP of sales. And the VP of sales probably is coming from a major logoed organization. And that's water and oil, right? That is, that doesn't work because they're used to selling on the brand name. This is an upstart, right? They're used to having a lot of support, and it's you and the founder, right? And you're on desks that you put together, and maybe you got a laptop and maybe you didn't, so it's a different environment. And
love that you're starting with the common mistakes that we all make as founders, especially technical founders and whatnot. So I sorry to interject here. I just love that you're starting with this because I see this all the time and it crashes and burns. Okay, keep going.
Fast and furious, right? So if like the mantra that we could fix today is don't do this. And listen, there's going to be a point in time that you're going to have to. There's going to be a point in time that your board is going to want you to, or the funding partners are going to want you to. Don't do it right out of the gate. Find somebody, probably find a C student, right? Somebody that's C student, maybe somebody that played some sports, somebody that has some level of grit and tenacity. Maybe they have some things that they have overcome and try to figure out, right? So somebody that was dyslexic, right? So they have to kind of figure out how to learn, because they're going to be crafty just like you're going to be crafty. They're going to have a chip on the shoulder just like you as the founder has a chip on the shoulder that they got to prove some stuff. And somebody that's extremely coachable. And then think like a you're if it's a technical founder, they're a systems engineer, right? So think about how you program, but now program your sales process, right? And you have to kind of think through. We spend more time on flowcharts, right, than anything else. Everybody thinks it's just sexy and we're just using words and making scripts. I spend more time about the process and the flow of everything than anything else when we're thinking that through. So find somebody that you could coach, and don't. Here's the next thing we find. Oh, my best friend, he could talk to people. He's really, really friendly, right? It does not make him a good salesperson or her a good salesperson, but they get put in a sales role, right? So we got to fix that. So we've talked about how do we fix it, right? Who do we look for, create a process. And now you just keep on improving the process, right? Kind of looking at where the constraints are, right? We look for the constraint in the sale process 24/7. Where are the constraints? What's holding things down? And then, just kind of go with it. And so that's how one should do if you're in pre-revenue stage, probably to about maybe a million, right? Half a million
Okay.
to about a million, maybe 1.2 million. And it just depends on the price point that you're selling at, right? If MRR, right, maybe you're going to wait till about 2 million. So that's what the biggest mistakes that we see with founder-led companies. And we joked about, what happens then. And so what you've done is when you've gone out and hired a big VP of sales, you're burning through cash, right? So now you can't do it. The second thing that we see is that you got to make sure that the incentives are aligned, right? And
Ooh, I like
you
this.
said something very smart. I want my salespeople to make as much as possible. So you really want to upload the upside, right? Make sure that they're driven. You're looking for grit when you're hiring, but you're also looking for money motivation. You're looking for different levels of motivation, and you want to make sure that the money is aligned. So one is that they are bringing profitable deals in, right? But two is that everybody's winning. And a lot of times we'll come in and say, "Ooh, okay, we got to change the commission structure." That's a difficult conversation to happen. But what's happening is they're incentivized to bring in bad deals. Maybe the SDRs are making more than the AEs because the SDRs are just on set. So
And we're going to
sometimes
pause
we
for
have
a
to.
moment. We're going to pause for a moment just to say what some of the acronyms are, because I know what they are, just having
Hey,
built
sure.
companies,
Okay.
but a
Right.
lot of our audience do not know. So you already said MRR earlier.
Monthly reoccurring revenue, right? So ARR is annual reoccurring revenue. So usually SaaS companies sell that way. Some other things are subscription based and they sell monthly reoccurring revenue. SDR, which is I think an acronym I use, is sales development rep, right? Or something it's called BDR, SDR, business development rep or sales development rep. They are usually the front line of reaching out to people. They're the people that are in your inbox on LinkedIn that are probably annoying you and say, "Hey, just
Calls.
bumping this up," or "Hey, love," yeah, right. But hey, they're
Yep,
doing a job and they're probably doing it well.
exactly.
So spread some love to them, right? So the
Absolutely.
SDR is the front line. AE, account executive, really is the person that maybe is quota carrying, and he or she is now responsible for delivering a quota or delivering a book of business over the course of quarters, months, or years, however you want to look at it. VP of sales, that's self-defined. I don't know if I talked about EBITDA, but earnings before interest and taxes, right? So you want to make sure that you have a lot of profitability or you're driving EBITDA, because sometimes we misconstrue the sales commission structure. So they're getting commissioned at a much more rapid pace than the company is. Maybe there's a burn rate. A burn rate is, are you churning customers through? And so they're getting all their money on the front end, but you're losing a person at 3 months in, and now that's a really unprofitable sale. So that's a lot of math on a Saturday
Yeah,
morning.
I know, but I exactly. I could nerd out on this kind of stuff because as an executive, like especially an early founder, and especially if you're not used to sales and you have no idea how to set up a healthy commission structure that is going to set your salesperson up because you want them to be driven, right? You want them to want to do those cold calls, to want to have those long, challenging conversations and to keep going through many no's, right? You want to have that incentive. And at the same point, you don't want to incentivize them to sell something that, for example, your customer experience or the rest of your team can't fulfill, right? And you don't want them to sell something that's going to then crash and burn. So you're going to have customer churn, customer turnover. They're going to leave, any of that kind of stuff. You don't want them to now be enemies with the account executives or the other people of the team because of that. So I think that commission structures, I'm just so glad we kind of went down this little rabbit hole. And I know you're thinking, Angela, you did not send me this question at all. But I'm glad we went down this rabbit hole because it's so important. And I believe it's one of the big mistakes I see when small companies start to set up a sales team.
I think you're spot on, right? And we're passionate about really having line incentives, right? And I want my sales, like you, I want my salespeople to make as much as possible, but it's got to be fair to the organization, and it's got to be self-fulfilling. The other thing that we see that sometimes with smaller companies is they also then throw a lot of stuff on the salesperson, right? And so not only do you want to make sure your commission structure is aligned, but you also want to make sure your allocation of time and duties are aligned, right? Because if you've hired a
Yeah.
true hunter, if you've hired
Right.
somebody that, if go back to our caveman days, he or she went out, brought the food back so that everybody could eat. They're driven by the hunt. They're driven by
Yes.
going out and finding the new logo. The logo is a new customer, right? Going out and finding the new business, if you will. That motivates them. That's how you reward them. Everything else. Don't make them now manage that relationship. They're not going to be good account executives. They're not going to be good customer success, right? And it's just a different things. And we see this all the time where we have to kind of parcel out all these responsibilities that they've now given the salesperson because we're brought in because nobody's selling. Well, nobody's selling because they only get 3 hours a day to sell, and the other 8 hours a day, if it's a startup, right, everybody's working 11, 10 hours, is spent doing all the other stuff. And so you got to say, let's figure out really what's mission critical for this salesperson to go out and capture the revenue that we need to capture. And then who else can we bring in, usually at a lower dollar amount, right? Usually at somebody that's probably more mission matched and are going to do a much better job at the customer success, right? The onboarding. So you have to think about the totality of it. And the reason why I say that in alignment with the commission is you got to leave some money on the table so you could fund those other resources and have the conversation with the salespeople. I think you have to look at it holistically and saying, it goes back to what we're saying is what's profitable. Here's the work that you don't want to do. I need to go out and fund that work. So therefore, I got to take something from the commission structure. I'm not taking it away to be a jerk. I'm not taking it away for XYZ or 1, 2, 3. I'm taking it away for the bigger good of the business. And one of the things that we see, and I actually have to give it, I think it's Dr. Dover who does a lot of work at University of Texas with their sales core curriculum for their university. And he says when he goes out and talks to companies, the one thing that they are looking for, the one thing they know that's a success on an entry level salesperson is their business acumen. If they don't have business acumen, they're not going to be successful.
I love this. One thing I was thinking about too, when you were talking about setting up the whole team for success, right? And that's part of as you're growing as a company and you're thinking, okay, who is the next right decision, next right role to hire for? When you get to a certain stage and you start having your account executives and your customer experience individuals, your onboarding, your implementation, is also to think about what the incentive, how you can align the incentive for them. So it also is this whole, like, they have skin in the game to, for example, get the customer onboarded as quickly and efficiently and successfully as possible, right? They have skin in the game to make sure that customer doesn't churn, because if the customer churns, then you're putting more burden on the key salesperson because they have to bring in even more business just to account for what went out the other door. So understanding those dynamics within teams and where you have the superstars and putting the superstars in their places and allowing them to align, I think is really important.
Yeah, I think retention is not a sexy topic, but I think it's the most important topic, especially in a MRR, monthly recurring revenue driven organization. I think we don't spend a lot of time about that. I think retention is the new growth, right? Especially in this day and age where it's just more expensive to go out and hire and find customers, right? So what are we going to pay for a customer? CAC, right? Cost of acquiring a customer. CAC, I guess, is the proper way to pronounce it. But we don't spend a lot of time on those, but we need to think about that. And I think that we as business leaders have to think about retention more, right? I joke, when I moved from VP of sales to president, I spent more time thinking about churn and acquisition and cybersecurity. Two things that kept me up at night, right? So you have to think about both of those.
Yeah. Well, first off, I've built most of my brand on customer experience. I love customer experience. I love for customers to feel the love, know that it's authentic and genuine. And if I can build a company that has negative churn, which means we're bringing in more customers than we are losing, then that is just a win across the board. And it translates as well into employees, because then when you are able to make your employees happy, you're able to take care of your customers as well. The whole team is being lifted. However, Nick, you're often brought in not at the times when the company is just soaring in their monthly or annual reoccurring revenue and everyone is in a circle singing Kumbaya. You are brought in to help in the moments when they're not. So one of the things I was just thinking about, how would a young or a smaller company, what are some early signs that things are starting to go in the wrong direction, and maybe even some early signs that you think most people and most executives and leaders ignore that you wish they would pay attention to earlier and call in someone like yourself earlier to try and drive towards success and remediating those challenges?
So, well, the easiest one is you're burning cash, right? If you're pre-revenue, you're burning cash. There's there's an equation we look at sales velocity, right? So how long things are sitting in the pipeline, how long it takes for deals to get sold. That's critical, right? Are deals not getting moved? Opportunities, right, in the pipeline aren't moving through getting to close. That's a sure sale, right? Something's going amiss. So you have bloated pipelines. And so you as the founder is looking at this and saying, oh my, we've got $5 million in projected pipeline. Well, how much of that is real, right, versus fiction, right? How much of that actually comes to fruition? And so those are the telltale signs, right? We also look at what's the production per salesperson, right? If I've got one person that's bringing in all my revenue and I've got a 5-person sales team, I'm in trouble. Because if Nick is my number one producer, he leaves, I am exposed as a business owner. So we want to look at what's the diversification of the sales by sales rep, right? Especially if they're all selling to the same type of customers, right? Because sometimes small to mid-sized businesses, SMBs, we would call that, maybe have lower transaction versus enterprise. Enterprise may take a little bit longer. There's going to be more people around the table. So you have to look at the totality of it. So the first thing we say is, we're usually brought in, if they're forward thinking, that's great. Usually we're brought in, there's a fire, right? And it's like, I was just on the phone with a prospect, wonderful business, wonderful guy. He's like, well, I want to save Q4. And this, and we're recording this in
Wait,
November.
right,
And
right,
I said,
Q4.
Q4 is done, right?
Yeah,
Q4
exactly.
ends on December 12th, right? Because everybody's going to go away for the holiday. If you're selling to corporations, legals closed down. I mean, it's done. I hate to be the bearer of bad news.
I would want to say, so you want to save Q4 of 2026, right?
Yeah, I should have said that. You're smarter than I told the truth, right? And we try to be no BS because we're brought in and we're like, hey, listen, we're going to tell you the truth. We're coming in. If it's a firefight, I also want to. First thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the makeup of the team from a psychographic perspective. One is, do they have the right people in the right positions? Doesn't mean that they're the wrong people for the organization, just means they may not be in the right position. I'm going to do that really fast. And if Susie is not a salesperson, but she's great, I'm going to get her customer success right or get her someplace else. So that's the second thing we're going to look at. If there's dysfunction among the sales team, usually that's leadership, right? So we're going to have to kind of get into that, or lack of leadership, right? And now they're kind of self-creating, and we all read Lord of the Flies, right? So we know what's going to happen if there's no leadership there. So we kind of have to get in and put distill some order in chaos, if you will, end of the day reporting, all that good stuff that salespeople hate. So, we would love to be able to be brought in, but I think if you are a business owner, a young business owner, an early revenue business owner, and you're listening to this, what are the things I should listen for? Are my deals taking too long to go through? Are things languishing in pipelines forever? When I ask questions to the salespeople about specific deals, do I get a story or do I get facts? That's the
Oh,
number
I
one
love
thing.
this. Yeah. And I also like to ask the questions of, okay, who is the person you're talking to? Because I often find, especially younger salespeople, think and they put a projection as if they're going to close this deal. Let's just make up a time period. They're going to close this deal in 60 days. And then you ask them, okay, who is the person you're talking to? And the person that they're talking to right now isn't even the decision maker. They have no buying power. They have no buy in. They then need to be, and so then you say, okay, no, that person needs to now be your champion. How fast can you get that champion to get you up to the person who's actually going to be able to make that decision? And I find that, especially for young sales professionals, that is something that they struggle to understand is, are they talking to someone who can make the decision? And if not, is this a potential champion? Do they have the equity within the company that you're trying to sell in where they can get you to that person? The other thing is thinking about when we're talking about these small companies, and especially if you're VC or private equity backed, you have a board. And guess what? Your board wants projections, right? And sometimes the people who are on your board have been successful at selling, but in different industries. And one struggle that I see is people who don't understand the sales cycles can be very industry. It's, for example, healthcare. If you're going to sell into healthcare, it's going to be a very different timeline that you have to figure out how to put into your projections than if you're selling a direct to consumer that can immediately make a decision in the next 15 minutes.
I think that is probably one of the most critical things that doesn't get talked about enough, right? And some of that is you have to educate your board, right? And and usually they're data driven, so you just kind of have to share with them the data. I had an early company in 2001, and I made the critical mistake of underestimating the length of time it was going to take for us to sell into the marketplace. And we were selling into medical, right? And I came from the medical field, right? So I kind of knew it. I projected it to be 120 days. It turned out to be 180 to 210. Right. And so you're burning cash because of that. And so I think that's critical. And that's why we spend a lot of time on velocity. And we look at how long do things take to sell, get sold in here based on by the seller, right? Based on by the marketplace, based on sometimes geographically, right? Sometimes geographically people will do things faster in that, but people underestimate that. And we get founders all the time that think that the sales cycle should be probably if not a day, maybe a handful of minutes, right? And it's really weeks to months to years. And so we kind of have to kind of coach them and say, well, where'd you come up with that, right? Why do you think that it's going to sell in 24 days for enterprise accounts? I mean, you're not even going to go through legal in less than 30 days, right? So let's be truthful to ourselves. And some of it is, we listen, we've all created decks, and I'm pointing a finger, four at myself, right? One going this way, four back at me. We've all created decks with projections, right? And we've all done that. And you're like, well, let's just adjust this, and it's going to tell a better story, and then we'll get in and fix it. And so there is a little bit of fiction in most presentations to boards that is there. So that's for sure.
Yeah, exactly. When I look at, especially now in my role at Biolocity and driving early stage devices out, and when I look at their projections, I can pretty quickly ask a few questions to be able to identify if they're just full of shit or dreaming and completely ignorant, right? Because not all people are lying to you. They just don't know, and they're going through that. Or if, as you mentioned, they're data backed, and we know all projections are going to be wrong regardless. But I love looking into that. So thinking about you and your career, and you've held a lot of different hats over this time. Okay, so the beauty about you, especially being able to come into these companies, is you've been in all of these seats, right? You've been the entrepreneur, you've been the executive, you're also a professor, right? So when you take a step back from looking at that, can you think of any personal through line that kind of shaped you into who you are today and helps you make some of those decisions that you make today?
That's a great question. And I try to do some level of self-reflection about this type of thing um, every quarter. And one of the things that Nick today, much more so than Nick earlier in his career, is I've seen a lot more, right? It takes a lot more to get me flustered, right? I also know that sometimes sellers have so much emotion attached to a deal that it becomes unhealthy, right? We just have poured our hearts and souls into this deal. It's never going to close, right? Or it's never going to close in the timing that you want. And so you almost have to have kind of float above it and say, okay, I've seen this, I've done this, this is where we go. I also think the work that we do, the reason why I love it and the reason why I made the decision early in the career is not to be hyper niched focused, is to, I know you harvest bees, right? You are a bee. I want to be a bumblebee, right? And I like going from industry to industry to industry, much like a bumblebee does, because we see so much. And it allows me to understand what's going on. One is I could steal, right? So take the pollen and bring it
Yeah,
over to different
love it.
to different industries, because some industries do things really well, and you could take that to other industries that are lagging behind. And so we do that because we're in so many different industries. It like I've seen everything, right? I know what's going on. We have a client, that's in medical, and funding just got shut down, right? Her world went from I'm going fast and furious and growing this company, right? She was on a trajectory to kind of double her to it all getting closed, right? And so now what has to happen? And so one is a dangerous number, right? So one industry could go belly up on you, and if you're heavy into it, then you're upside down in your company. But two is by going into all these different companies and see that. And I think it's similar to what you said is, you know, we do it in a professional way, we do it in a coaching and mentoring way, but we could call BS. We'll keep it PG for your listeners. We could call BS on a lot of things and say, listen, and two is sometimes the in-house staff will not question or go deep on the questions that you ask that we will. Okay, it sounds like Nick might be your champion or cheerleader versus your decision maker, right? What is finance saying about, finance has even got into this deal. Okay, so we got to add 30 to 45 days, right? So we just know, right? We've been in a lot of industry. We've sold everything. We have a team that knows what they're doing. It makes it, I don't want to say pompous, right? Because I probably came across a little egotistical, but it takes a lot to kind of fluster me, right? Now, not every day is sunshine and roses, right? Not every day is Christmas. There's days I'm like, oh, how did that happen for my clients? But it takes a lot for me to really get get razzled and frazzled, right? Because of the fact that I've seen so much. And I have a lot of joy in the sales process, right? I love teaching it and I love when it's done right. And I have a lot of anger is not a bad, I dislike bad sales processes. I dislike the bad salespeople that we started talking about so much. So kind of my mission is to really call BS on a lot of the bad players that are out there and a lot of bad processes and systems. And I think as you kind of, if you're listening to this, I got a little gray hair, right? I got a little gray beard, right? I've been around a little bit more, so you kind of see some things. But we have we're big on fresh eyes, right? We're big on teach me, let me learn new things, let me see what's going on. That's why we are in a lot of different industries, but also have a lot of different passions because I think it keeps a fresh mind.
I agree completely. And I love the key that one key that you were just making was because you're so diverse in your experiences, yet sales is still sales, but yet people and dynamics are different in those areas. So when you see something in this one area, you may think, wow, that's really great. Like I'm going to bring it into this other area that's never seen it before. And that's so much value add because if you're building a company, you're going to stay in one trajectory, right? You're going to stay within, for example, medical technology is most of my passion as far as that spectrum goes. But really, you can use these building blocks from all the other areas and bring so much wisdom in. I'm a big believer in bringing in coaches, bringing in people who can have that outside view, and also they're not like so tied into the drinking the Kool-Aid of the company that they can actually say some hard truths. So can you give us an example? Because I know you've been doing this for a while and you've probably seen some. Can you give us an example of a time that you had to do this with a client and maybe an example of when maybe it went really well and then maybe even an example where it didn't go well and what lessons you learned as a leader and a collaborator through that journey?
So I'll use a story, right? And some examples because it's best if we go deep on that. We had I had a couple different clients that were kind of in the same quasi verticals, right? So they weren't direct competitors or quasi verticals. What we realized when we distilled the playbook is the scripts all sounded the same, the outreach all sounded the same, and it was very cookie cutter because they're all following the same guru, if you will, right? Nick went to company A, he got this script, came to company B, he starts applying. Everything sounded the same. And they thought that they were really differentiating themselves in the marketplace, but it was just all generic gobbledygook, and the discovery all sounded the same. And so we kind of had to peel back and kind of create a new because of the fact that their salespeople thought that they were differentiating themselves. They thought that they had a differentiated sales process, but they didn't realize that in their, when we kind of mystery shopped their competition, that everybody was selling the same way and everybody sounded the same. So therefore, it became commoditized, right? So therefore, we're just making a decision on price because there was really no get to how do we provide value, right? So that's
Right.
number one. Number two is I've learned you can't call the baby ugly early, right? You got to have to get some wins, if you will, because if you call it ugly too soon, unless you have unless you're brought in by a board or a funding partner, right, a family office or VC or something like that, then you could call the baby ugly and say, hey, listen, you got a problem. I had a client that I thought we were going to have for a long time. And they brought us in to evaluate. Their core business was doing great. They was doing about 5 to 6 million, and they really weren't doing too much to get that. But they had a new product they were trying to take to the marketplace. And really, it was a solution looking for an audience versus a problem looking for a solution.
Okay. Yes.
And so I had to tell them that. And I then became persona non grata, right? And one is I was brought in real fast, right? They wanted this turned around really quick. And I'm like, no, they were like, well, can't we just go out and find? I'm like, no, this is, sorry, there is no need in the marketplace and it is not going to get sold as fast as you want it to. And I'm okay. I'm okay with that decision that I made to not string them along or not be like every other consultant that's going to say, well, let's keep on trying to kick it down the road for 90 days, 120 days. I came out of the chute fast. But it goes back to I didn't have the political capital to kind of say, the baby's ugly, right? But that's okay. I'm okay with it. So I learned from that. I've learned early on in with this company is to find out where the politics lie, right? And kind of where the groundwork is. Who's got whose ear, right? Yeah, and those type of things.
Yes.
And many times I do not. I try not to take a. I try not to take jobs where I could tell there's a lot of politics and everybody's infighting, right? An executive team has some dysfunction or a leadership team has dysfunction because that's going to trickle down to the organization.
Right.
Unless we're brought in by a referral source, right, or a funding partner that brings us in that gives us a lot of work, I try to stay away from those as fast and furious as I can because of that. And listen, when we're all building our careers, we've all been in those environments as an employee, and they're draining. You come home from work and you're just exhausted. I'm like, life's too short. And so, I think those are some specific, without naming names, that
Yeah.
some specifics that
We're
we
not
could
naming any
do
names
of
today.
what we look for. Yeah, no, we want to keep the innocent. We want to keep the innocent unknown. So
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So in talking about, as you call them, the SMBs, so the small and medium sized businesses. Okay. So when you get hired by one of these that's struggling with sales, what is one of the early signals that tells you whether or not the problem you're dealing with at that company is a strategy problem, a process problem, or a people problem?
great question. Sometimes it's yes, yes, and yes, right? So now we got a really big problem. It depends if they've sold some stuff to the marketplace, right? And if they've kind of figured out, or one or two people have figured out kind of how to sell, it may not be a strategy problem. It may not be a product market fit, right? They probably got that pretty well. It might be that they're going after different audiences or different demographics or different businesses that it just doesn't make sense. Different SIC codes, different types of business lines that it doesn't make sense to. So if things have gotten sold in the past, but now are not, it's probably a process problem or a people
Ooh,
problem. And so we're going to kind of get to that. If
okay.
there is more than one salesperson, right? And one selling much more than the other, then we know we got a people problem, right? Or if there's five salespeople and one's, like we talked about it in one example, one's producing everything and the other four aren't doing anything, it's probably a people, right? We've probably mismatched people for the roles. 9 out of 10 times, it's, we default to process. I look at process first, right? We kind of just, once I check the box on the people, like, can they sell? Will they sell? Will they sell here? Will they be successful? Are they, is there's dysfunction in the ranks? What's going on? Do I have people that, okay, yeah, what's the team look like? It's always first, you got to get the right people on the bus, get the bus going in the right way, and then you got to make sure the bus is functioning really well. So we look to strategy first. That takes a lot to unwind if strategy is bad, right? So I used the example of the one person when they brought in there, it was just a bad strategy, right? And when you say that, sometimes the gig gets caught fast.
Some people could look at, and we're going back to that bringing in the VP of sales too early scenario, right? And some people could say, and I think incorrectly, based on especially what you just said, could say that that's just a people problem. And say, oh, we just brought in the wrong VP of sales. Let's find another VP of sales. But I love what you just said, because really at the core, that is a strategy problem at the piece. And that there is a big difference between the two of those. I love that you called that out.
Yeah. And, the easy answer is people, right? It's just, we just go hire the right people. They just don't sell enough. A lot of times we will hear they're just not doing enough prospecting, right? That seems to be
Right.
that's the biggest problem in the world, right? And I'm like, okay, okay, what does that look like, right? And so we kind of dig into like, well, they are doing that, right? Or they're calling, maybe there's some tweaks that need to be done, or a lot of times we're brought in, we're like, everything is great, we just need better scripts. And when I know that, I'm like, oh, this isn't going to go well, right? Because I know there's a lot more problems, but I'm like, okay,
Right.
yeah, we need some more scripts, so that's fine. Let's get some more scripts. So usually when you're brought in, it's not for the problem that they put on the table, right? But you
Absolutely.
have to kind of say, okay, we're going to look at this, but we're also going to look at X, Y, Z, 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, 6. There's some, we're in some more mature markets too, right? So we do some work in technology. Obviously, we do some work at, sometimes the more mature markets, the the tenured founder that brings us in or owner that brings us in is just, well, they just got to hit the phones more, and it may be not that, right? And so every the reason why I like it is we were like Forrest Gump, right? Every box of chocolate is so different, and every engagement is so different. But we do, there are, we got 17 levers that we're going to pull, right, to try to figure it out, and we just kind of go through and say, okay, is it this, is it this, is it this, is it this? That's why we like to start with a high level audit, right, and kind of just ask these questions so we could see, is it that? And sometimes then there's solace in the reporting to say, okay, well, here's your process, which no one's following, right? So we got a process problem, and here we did some psychoanalysis on the folks, and Nick isn't a seller, and you've got him in a selling role, and Susie, would be great in customer service, and these other three kind of, their disc profile is, that they just have a high propensity to want to be liked. Well, that's a kiss of death for a salesperson. So we got to
Yes.
change out the people, right? And so, you got to get into the mud, if you will, or the thick of things. And it always is fun. But like I said, usually it's when you're brought in for problem X, it's not X that they brought you in for. It's not scripting.
Yeah, without a doubt. Okay, so what are some common processes that you see what are some that you see that you really wish people would stop doing because they just don't work and you're repeatedly seeing them fail? And what are some processes that you think more and more companies should start focusing on?
So I don't know if it's a process, but I'm going to piggyback on one of the things that you said because I think it's the number one problem, and it's that they have not taught their sellers to quantify if they're selling to the right person. And so deals are sitting in the org chart, right? And so they don't manage the org chart, if you will, if they're selling into a large company or even a small company, right? And the person is if whenever I hear, oh, this is the best sales call I've ever had, I know it's never going to close, right? Because that person is your cheerleader, right? They just want to give you, so of just knowing the right thing, the right, are you selling the right person? Do you need to get other people around the table? How are decisions made in the organizations? How do they think about they make decisions? How do they actually make decisions? So you have to kind of know all of that. So I think that's the number one thing. If people listen to this, that we've been at it for a while, if they paid attention to us long enough, they got to that, that's critical. And fix that with your sellers. Go deep on them doing discovery. Go deep on them really mapping it out. It's so easy to get all the data in organizations now. LinkedIn, Sales Navigator provides so much. You could other options. So I think that's one that they need to fix or get better at or train up their people.
Love. Okay.
The other thing that I think we talked about is not put the wrong archetype people in the wrong roles, right? Don't go out and hire that VP of sales too early. Don't go out and hire the VP of sales from a large organization and bring him into your startup, right? There's just don't, and I see that problem happen over and over and over again. And I don't fault anybody, right? Everybody, we just think we're making the right decision, but don't do it, folks. Please listen. And don't really spend some time of understanding what type of salesperson you need, and then figure out what we build an ICP, right? Ideal customer profile, right? For our customers, but ISP, ideal seller profile. What does this person need to look like? Just go deep on that, right? What do I want? What are their demographics I want? What are their psychographics I want? What are their motivators? Everything like that. It will spend some time, but it will save you so many headaches in the future. So those are two.
those two are so key just in making hiring decisions for a lot of different stages of
Yeah.
companies and
Yeah.
roles. I'm on a search committee through Georgia Tech for this new program that we're starting. We're hiring an executive director for it. And we're having a lot of conversations with the candidates that we have. So we have some amazing candidates that we're interviewing. And some of the questions we're asking are, okay, wait, does this executive director, do they need to be the evangelist? Are they that type of personality where they're bringing in the additional resources? Do they need to be the hardcore dig in and just do it, but not that much of an evangelist, right? At what stage do they need to be an up and coming? Like, do we have the resources to support their growth, or are we at a stage right now where we really need someone who has solid experience? These are the questions you need to take a step back and really dig, like you said, that ideal seller profile for where you're at and how, because the other thing is if you bring the wrong person in, you're having an impact on their lives as well. Like, these are human beings, they have bills to pay, right? So I hope the listeners continued to hear the key thing that they absolutely should not do. Now, one of the things that I was thinking about is, I was just talking about these demographics of this role that we're hiring for through this program at Georgia Tech, and thinking about resources and how we're going to apply resources. And I would lean into energy, because those small and mid-sized businesses have very little bandwidth and often very little capital, and you have to be very strategic about it. So when you're working with them, where do you think the leaders are most often misallocating their energy when you think about working on sales and growth?
So I think where they're misallocating their energy is when they're doing pipeline reviews, they're listening for what they want to hear versus asking the questions that they don't want to ask.
Oh, yes. Okay. I
So
love
they just
this.
want to hear that there's a lot of deals in the pipeline, right? Instead of going deep of saying, okay, why do we think that this is going to get closed within this quarter or whatever that looks like, right? So I think the energy is sometimes they'll swoop in and just sit in a pipeline review on a monthly basis, and you'll kind of hear what they want to hear. They're like, oh, this is gonna be great, the board's gonna be so excited, I've got 10x my revenue in my pipeline, when none of it's going to close, right? Or if it's going to close, it's not going to close in the timing that they will. So I think it's, you got to go deep, and you have to have the intestinal fortitude to ask the really uncomfortable questions, but you're the leader. That's your job, right? Whether it's the sales leader or the leader of the organization, to ask those hard questions on, will this deal close? The other thing that I think that everybody doesn't spend enough time is, how do we articulate our value to the marketplace? I think we internally think that we know that and we're articulating it, but you as the leader need to be focused on that and articulating that 24/7 to everybody in the organization, and then translating that to your demographic that you're selling to, right? Your target market that you're selling to. And really, what does the value look like? Because in absence of that, everything is a commodity. Everything is, we're just going to have a race to the bottom for whoever gives us the best price. And you kind of have to say, no, this is who we are. And whenever it's a price competition, it means that we didn't really differentiate ourselves in the marketplace. We didn't spend time on our position, and we didn't, now I'm going to have my marketing geek hat on, right? So sorry about that.
Right.
But you got to spend time on that, and you got to spend time on articulating that and spending enough on that. And I think where we get brought in, and really where we do a lot of this selling, is not, listen, there's no pixie dust that I could sprinkle over a sales force in a minute and make them better. There isn't a magic script. If it was, geez, I'd be flying private, not, and all that. But you got to get into and say, how do we provide value, right? What's going on in today's marketplace, right? I will tell you, the tariffs for some industry, that's a different conversation than they thought they were ever going to have this year, right? I will tell you, the government shutdowns and the slowdown of fundings for certain industry, healthcare, education, early childhood education, we're in all these spaces their world's got rocked. This is a different conversation. Pipelines are completely upside down. We're filming, we're recording this in at the end of 2025, so to put some context in that. But so I think you got to spend your time of how do we provide value. How do we articulate that value? What's our position in the marketplace? What's our differentiating our marketplace for today, for who we're selling to today? And it could change. It's going to morph, and our position hopefully is always a thing, but you got to do that. The final thing is I see them do, especially if it's a product-driven company, they're really fast to pivot on the product, and they'll be spending enough time and educating the sales team on that, on the things that new things that they're adding to the market, into the product and service. And it's like, they're not selling XYZ. Well, they didn't know XYZ. It didn't get articulated, or it got distilled down by the time it got to them that they didn't realize what XYZ could do. So that's a long answer to a short question.
Well, and I think I would summarize the first piece of your answer into the so what factor. Like I'm a professor too at Emory, and some of my master students, when they present, they just recently presented on this unmet clinical need and why should we address it. I watched the presentation. At the end, I was like, really? So what? Like, you didn't sell me. I didn't see a single patient in any of this. I didn't see any lives changed. So it's that so what factor. And it's the success does not mean being the low price leader in all of the things, which is another thing we struggle with. We just had a team present yesterday, and they're a phenomenal team. They're phenomenal technology, and they're presenting to this board. And of course, someone's digging in on what's the cost going to be. They are too early stage to be listing a cost, right? And I've coached them to not say a cost. And sure enough, he throws out a cost. And then I'm just like, oh no. And everyone in the room was like, you should not be trying to be the low cost. And I mean, they're going to learn lessons the hard way. But the so what and trying to be the low cost, instead being that match for what the industry you're in really needs to make an impact, and helping each other learn how to sell. I think those are some big keys that we need to lean into a little bit more.
Yeah. And maybe that falls in sales enablement in bigger companies. Maybe it doesn't, maybe call training. But I really think the frontline manager, and that's the role that we take in a lot of these companies, right? Besides the strategy and the execution, it's the frontline manager. You got to just kind of constantly be instilling that in, right? And we are making sales managers to be CRM jockeys, right? Versus spending the time of coaching, and this is about leadership, right? So it's about badass leadership, which I love the title and I love everything you're doing, is really having the moxie, has that leader to say, I could do all this that you want me to do, because we all love reports, right? Because it justifies people. But really what I need to do is this, and this is spending time on the calls, spending time in the car, spending time in the field, spending time doing deal due diligence, right? Or doing role playing. I spend more time with role playing and, just in general, and doing little tweaks or saying, so what? Well, they present, so what? Why would I buy? What's besides the fact that you want me to buy, right? Which is great, but why would I buy, right? And so you kind of have to spend your time doing that. And I think we, as leaders and organizations, and I'm using the collective we, have to free up our frontline managers or get them some help and some training. It goes back to when we first started, our conversation. The biggest problem we see is you take the individual high-performing salesperson and make him, Nick, your sales leader. Now, Nick doesn't know how to lead, never leaded. His motivators are completely different. So we're going to go, you got to get to the basics and you got to focus on that, but you got to be distilling why all the time, or so what. I'm going to put that sign up on my bookshelf. So what? I'm going to steal it from Angela.
Do it. I absolutely love that. I think that I've loved this conversation and thinking about the key pieces, especially for our small and mid-sized businesses that I know you love to focus on. I find so much passion in those specifically because oftentimes I see that they're a little bit closer to the product and to the generation of the product and the passion behind it. And also it's easier to make a big impact then I use this idea of a fast moving train. It's really hard to turn around a speed bullet train versus one that's just getting started.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all about the small businessman, right? Small business, the entrepreneur, right? It's going out into the marketplace and just taking that risk. It's going to get bloodied and you're going to get bludgeoned, and listen, in America, at least if we fail, which we probably will, we have the ability to reinvent ourselves and try it again, which I'm passionate about. I love the space that you spend a lot of time in, the medical device, right? I mean, I think about, aside from artificial intelligence, I really think that the advancements of medical technology is just mind blowing, and it's just getting better and smarter. And I want the
Yes.
best and the brightest in there as we all age. We all want the best technology. And I want the best and the brightest focusing on building new solutions for our most passionate thing, which is healthcare, right? And it's a diminishing resources that we all deal with every day. And so how do we get better and have a better quality of life? And the work that you're doing there is so important. And my hat goes off to you. I really loved my time in healthcare, right, as a healthcare marketing VP, and that. But at a certain point too, it also kind of just became about the numbers versus the patient, right? You can't forget the patient, right? And I think a lot of times you can't forget the customer. And when you're selling to the customer, you have to realize that they are taking some level of risk with you, right? Especially if you're a new technology or a new business, that they could burn political capital. They could make no one made a mistake for not buying something, right? And or got fired for not buying something, but they get fired if they bought the wrong CRM system, the wrong enterprise software system, the wrong whatever it is that didn't do what it was supposed to do. And so you have to realize that. I always say, listen, we're selling to the ghost of Christmas past, present, and future, right? Whenever we're selling to people, the mistakes that they've made in the past, the decisions that they made in the past, we all have them. I've got them myself. I've made some horrible decisions. Luckily it was when I was an employee versus on my own business. But we've all made decisions. I got us into a very long lease in the wrong location, right? And I still think about that. To this day, the people that did that, they gave me a Movado standing clock, right? That would sit on your desk, right? I keep it. It's over here on my bookshelf, so I can be reminded of, hey, listen. One is you made a decision, so you can't beat yourself up. You did what you thought you were at the time. You did what thought you was right with the data you had. But the importance of asking, so what? Asking why? Asking all those questions. I keep that there to remind myself that, hey, listen, we make bad decisions. And the key is, can I rebound from these bad decisions?
That is so powerful. When you think about healthcare, when I think about healthcare and I'm working with these teams, and first off, I'm telling them, look, you are always selling. You should always be prepared to talk about what you're doing and selling. But then I also say to them, this is from coming from a quote unquote non-sales person. Okay. This is Angela's sales technique. Okay. In the healthcare space is you start with heart, you delve into the facts and the data, and then you end with heart. And when you can do that, and I think the two pieces of the heart are that so what piece, why should I care? Why should it matter? And then I find too many times teams start too much with the data and they don't get that person tied in, and that really can lead you down the wrong rabbit hole. I also think what I tell young salespeople is be weary of the too fast yes and the too fast no. Because the too fast no is often not a no, and the too fast yes is often not a yes.
Spot on, right? We call it the heart and the head close,
Yes.
right? You got to close, you got to sell it to the heart, you got to sell to the head. And heads are facts and figures, and the heart is really telling the story of how you impact the lives of those that you serve. And I don't think we tell stories enough. We want to hear yes so much, right? The fast yes, easy in, easy out is what we always say. That too fast is never going to close, right? And the too fast of the no, they know that they're an easy sale, right? So they kind of put that barrier up, right? They're like, I made mistakes, I got sold something, and so the answer is no.
Exactly. Okay, are you ready for a couple rapid fire questions?
Love it, love it.
First off, you say that you're a big reader. If a salesperson or marketing individual is looking for one book that you really think that they should read today, what would that book be?
So if it's a marketing person, they should start with, I think, positioning, Trout and Rice, or 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. I think, the stories are a little aged, right? But the principles are there. If
Okay.
they are a salesperson, I'm going to give them three. So
Okay.
I think it's old. It's old, and everybody's like, but I think they got to start with Zig Ziglar, right? Secrets of
Okay.
Closing Sale. If they don't do that, then they're same. I think they should look at spin selling, especially in their selling process. And I think, his name escapes me, but they should think about let's get real or let's not play. And it's
Ooh.
about having frank discussions with your buying community, whoever it is, about really is this a solution, right? So it's having the intestinal fortitude to have frank conversations.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Okay, let's talk a little bit about legacy. What does leaving a legacy mean to you?
Oh, great question. I think about that some days more than others, right? So I think it's really helping it from a professional standpoint. It's the people that I've mentored, right? The people that are still in sales, the young people that I hired many moons ago that still reach out to me on LinkedIn, or just, hey, thank you. You took a chance on me. That's important to me. Bringing good sellers into the marketplace, crafting up people, growing people. I think it's a passion for me, and it's been fun. I also think that I hope at the end of the day, people say that I help change the way that we approach sales management and sales leadership, and do it both from the heart and the head, and really helped some small businesses achieve their dreams.
Amazing. Okay, who is a mentor or leader that made a big impact on your life that you want to share some gratitude for?
Oh, great question. So, if I think about my healthcare days, I think about Jack Bardo. Jack Bardo was the first CEO that took a chance on me as a young guy out of MBA program as the VP of marketing. He hired me. Learned more from him than he even knows. Allowed me to fail. He allowed us to have frank conversations when I wasn't doing well, and I said, "Hey, listen, I don't think I'm serving you well. How can I serve you better?" So I learned a lot from him, a gentleman by a name of in Eric Kruger, who's been great to me. He was a CFO that I learned a lot from, right? So I learned a lot about the dynamics of the deal and the money. The money's got to make sense. So those guys were great. Gentleman by the name of Art Kent has passed away, but his family is still around, and his son is still a great salesperson. Art was a salesperson, and he hired me with no sales experience, and believed in me and coached me. And still to this day, I think about all those guys. So I think those are three people that really were really good mentors in the day to day. Philosophically and just from a body of work, a gentleman by the name of Dan Kennedy was very good to me. I've learned a lot from him. Some days were great, some days not so great, but he, pushed you to be better. So those are really really good. I've been blessed with really good uncles that were great mentors, and my father-in-law and my father, right, both from the corporate world, but about how to be men and how to be fathers, which I think is more important than the work we do every day.
And I'm confident there are some people that want to say thank you to you, Nick. So if you're listening and Nick has made an impact on your life, throw some gratitude into the comments for him, and we will make sure that he sees it. What, Nick, advice would you give to your younger self when you were new to your career?
Don't be afraid to take this swing to do something, or to speak up when you know that what's being said around the table is incorrect. Do it in a polite, professional manner, but don't be afraid to take some level of action, right, to kind of move forward to. The other thing is, don't be afraid to leave a role, even if the new role is a little scary and it's outside your comfort zone. Don't be afraid, because that's how you grow. That's how we grow. Doing the same thing over and over again, you become myopic, and that's not good to the organization or you.
Perfect. What did you want to be when you were a kid? What did you think you wanted to be when you grew up?
I am a really kind of a sick individual. I think I always knew I wanted to be a business owner, a small businessman or a business owner or salesperson. And the reason why I tell the story, because stories sell, is I had an uncle, right? My family was very entrepreneurial. My grandfather and their uncles were all entrepreneurial. In the day, they owned a produce company, right? So the worst business in the world to be in, because as soon as you pull away from the docks, your stock is rotting away. So you got to sell what's in the truck that day. But I kind of learned from them, and a lot of in the community I grew up in, and the community I live in, a lot of the friends and family were business owners, right? And maybe they were the biggest mentor, I didn't mention, but I should, was Mr. Jim Kavanaugh, was across the street from me. He owned like 5 gas stations, right? So it's not sexy business, but this guy provided for his family, was always there, grew up as an orphan, so he always made sure that every child that maybe the family was having a tough time had Christmas presents at Christmas time, and went out of his way. So I was always kind of awestruck by small business owners. When you're younger, you think, okay, maybe it's a gas station I'm going to own, or maybe it's a restaurant, or until you get into more dynamic things. But yeah, I always kind of knew I wanted to do that. I started out in college because my dad was in computer science, computer programming, and had a phenomenal job and provided really well for our family because of it. He said, "Well, go be a computer programmer." And I'm like, oh, okay, computer science. I like it. I took, basics in COBOL, but in college you had to get up because you were the freshman. You had to get up to get to the computer lab at 3. This is dating myself because nowadays everybody's doing it from their dorm rooms. But you had to go to the computer lab at 3 o'clock in the morning because that's the only time you could get on to run your punch cards. Really dating myself. But I I had the opportunity to go. I was going to transfer to a different university, University of Illinois, because they had a much more robust computer science program. And I got lucky that I went one weekend to visit my cousin. I'll never forget this, still tell this story all the time. And my other cousin, who was also at U of I, her now husband, but was their boyfriend, was a computer science major. So he took me to the lab, and I spent 3 days in the lab with those guys. I drove home realizing I would never be as good as they were. They were working on stuff, and they were so far more advanced than I ever was. So I went in marketing, right? What does every washed out computer science guy goes over and takes a marketing class. And that's what I got my degree in. So
I will tell you, when I went to school at Georgia Tech, the computer science building was the one that smelt the worst because I think the guys they were there at three
it should
in
have
the
been the
morning.
biology. Yeah. Yeah. It
I
should have been
was
the biology.
like,
Yeah.
showers and deodorants. I think they needed to have showers and deodorant and stuff for them there. I will tell you, the level of dedication you need to have for that is legit. So I love that story. Now, tell the audience first off how they can find you. Why should they look for you? What are you passionate about as far as collaborating with teams, and what's next for you?
So, I'm on LinkedIn, right? So it's Nicholas Loise, Nick Loise on LinkedIn. They could go to Sales Performance Team, which are our main company. We have some other secondary companies. We have a recruiting company that focuses on hiring salespeople. So if they're looking for a sales career, young person, go to yoursalesrecruiter.com. But the main business is Sales Performance Team, and they can find me there. LinkedIn, I'm very active on it. I'm probably too active on LinkedIn because we're there all the time. They could email me I think from the website they have my email. Don't email me to sell me something, but like get on the phone with me and try to sell me. Don't try to sell me over email, and I'll give you some critique and pointers. If you have a question, right? If you are a business owner and you just listen, I just think this, and I just need somebody, just give me a call. Tell them that you heard on Badass Business Leaders and you're a friend of Angela's and you're an avid listener, and I'm going to spend as much time with you as my give back to her and her team, who are phenomenal, the most professional team I've interacted. I do a lot of these podcasts. Your team is phenomenal. You should know that they are top shelf and then some. So just reach out to me, hit me up, Nick@salesperformanceteam.com. I think on my LinkedIn, you could also text me. So feel free to do that. Give me your question, give me your problem, and we'll work on fixing it together gratis for that. So that's how people get a hold of me, and I'm here to help. We do give first, right? I am a big believer of that, of say, just tell me what your problem is, especially if you're a young founder or startup, or if you're a business owner that's up against the wall and you've got some debt that you are worried about servicing, and you Christmas is around the corner. I'm here to help you. So give us a call.
Amazing. Okay, and it is a requirement of this podcast that everyone share their favorite motivational quote. So what is your favorite motivational quote, Nick?
So I think it fits with the topic of the show. So it's from a book, and the book is called Gunman's Rhapsody, and it's written by Robert B. Parker, right, which is my favorite author in the whole wide world, wrote the Spencer novels. And in it, the quote is, knowing what to do is easy. Doing it is hard.
Mic drop to that. Well, Nick, I know that you are super busy. Thank you for saying yes to talking about sales, the pros, the cons, the struggles, all the things we should improve, what's going well, what's not, on a Saturday with me in November. I'm very grateful you brought some badass information to this episode. I've learned a lot. I know our listeners will too, so thank you very much.
Thank you for all the work you do. I mean, it's not easy. Your team is phenomenal. You are phenomenal. You upped my game being on this. I am so proud of this phenomenal podcast and be part of this community. So thank you.
Thanks for joining me for today's episode of the Badass Leaders Podcast. To hear more interviews with industry experts and learn how to grow your career and leadership potential, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to ensure you do not miss future episodes. This podcast is a production of the AGN Group. To learn more about the AGN Group, visit our website at theagnGroup.com. There, you can discover more about our services, which include hosting workshops, management consulting, brand strategy, keynote speaking, and more. Follow us on all social media channels shown on the screen and displayed in the show notes. And until next week, be brave and be badass.